You know what's crazy? 3 weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out, and now everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster just because I was talking to my ex. I'm 28, my name's Paisley, and honestly, I'm so tired of people acting like I committed some unforgivable crime when all I did was have conversations with someone who actually listened to me. My fiancé Wyatt decided to completely lose his mind and ruin our rehearsal dinner because he found some text messages, and now everyone's taking his side like he's some innocent victim. But you want to know the truth? He brought this on himself by being the most boring, predictable guy on the planet. We'd been together for 3 years, and honestly, the excitement died after like 6 months. Don't get me wrong, Wyatt checked all the boxes my parents cared about. He had a stable career, came from a good family, never caused any drama or embarrassment. My dad loved him because Wyatt would just nod along with whatever anyone said, never challenged anyone's opinions, basically acted like the perfect little yes man. My mom was constantly going on about how lucky I was to find someone so reliable and responsible. But here's what nobody understood. Reliable and responsible doesn't mean exciting or passionate or even interesting. Wyatt's idea of a fun Saturday night was ordering pizza and watching whatever Netflix recommended. He proposed in our living room after we finished eating Chinese takeout, didn't even bother to make it special or memorable. Just pulled out a ring and asked if I wanted to get married. Real romantic, right? Meanwhile, my friends were getting these elaborate proposals with photographers and surprise trips and flash mobs. But I said yes, because honestly, what else was I going to do? I was 25, all my friends were getting engaged, and Wyatt seemed safe. My parents were thrilled because his family had money and he'd never embarrass us at social events. The wedding planning started immediately, and it was honestly exhausting. My mom took over most of it, which was fine by me because I had better things to do with my time. But every conversation became about flower arrangements and catering menus and seating charts. Wyatt would just sit there during these planning sessions, agreeing with whatever my mom suggested, never having any opinions of his own. It was like planning a wedding with a cardboard cutout. That's when my mind started wandering back to Colt. Colt was my ex from college. We dated for almost 2 years, and honestly, those were some of the best years of my life. He was everything Wyatt wasn't. Spontaneous, exciting, unpredictable. With Colt, every day felt like an adventure. He'd show up at my apartment at midnight just to drive somewhere and watch the sunrise. He'd plan surprise weekend trips without telling me where we were going until we got there. Being with him felt electric in a way that being with Wyatt never did. Sure, Colt wasn't as financially stable as Wyatt, and my parents thought he was too impulsive and irresponsible. But when I was with Colt, I felt alive. With Wyatt, I felt like I was slowly dying of boredom. When Colt reached out 6 months ago with just a simple, "Hey, thinking about you" text, I almost didn't respond. But then I thought, what's the harm in catching up with an old friend? We started texting occasionally, nothing serious at first, just reminiscing about college and talking about our lives. It felt so good to have someone ask how I was doing and actually care about the answer. Wyatt had gotten so comfortable in our relationship that he barely listened when I talked about my day at work or told him about things that were bothering me. The thing about Colt is that he actually paid attention to me, like real, genuine attention. When I told him I was stressed about work stuff, he didn't just grunt and change the subject like Wyatt always did. He'd ask follow-up questions, remember details from our previous conversations, actually engage with what I was telling him. Meanwhile, Wyatt couldn't even remember what department I worked in half the time. Colt and I started meeting up for coffee about 4 months ago, and I know how that sounds, but it was completely innocent at first. We'd meet at this cute little place downtown during my lunch breaks and just talk about everything. Our jobs, our goals, what we wanted out of life. It was so refreshing to have deep conversations again, because Wyatt and I never talked about anything meaningful anymore. Our conversations were all logistics. Whose turn to take out trash, what we needed from the store, whether his mom was coming for dinner Sunday. With Colt, we talked about books and movies and places we wanted to travel and childhood memories. He made me remember who I used to be before I became half of this boring couple. I started looking forward to these coffee meetings more than I looked forward to seeing my own fiancé, which probably should have been a red flag, but honestly, I just figured it meant I needed more intellectual stimulation in my life. It's not like I was doing anything wrong by having a friend who understood me and could hold an actual conversation. The talks gradually became more personal and intimate. Colt told me he'd never really gotten over me, that he'd made a huge mistake letting me go back in college. He said he'd been thinking about reaching out for years, but didn't want to mess up my happiness. But then he said he could tell from my social media that something was missing in my relationship with Wyatt. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. I was posting all these perfect couple photos, trying to convince everyone, including myself, that we were happy, but they felt so forced and fake. Wyatt and I looked good together on paper, but there was zero real chemistry or passion anymore. Colt could see right through all my pretending, and it felt incredible to have someone who really knew the real me instead of just the version I was performing for everyone else. I started staying late at my job sometimes, just so I could text Colt without Wyatt asking annoying questions about who I was talking to. Not because I was hiding anything terrible, but because Wyatt got all weird and possessive whenever I mentioned having lunch with male coworkers or anything like that. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments and give me guilt trips about spending time with other men, so I knew he'd completely overreact about Colt, even though we were just friends catching up. It was easier to keep the friendship private than deal with Wyatt's insecurity and jealousy over absolutely nothing. Colt understood me in ways Wyatt never bothered to try. When I told Colt about my dreams of maybe traveling more or taking some risks in life, he encouraged me and got excited about my ideas. When I mentioned wanting more adventure to Wyatt, he immediately started lecturing me about being responsible and saving money for our future house and retirement. See the difference? Colt believed in me and wanted me to be happy, while Wyatt just wanted to keep me trapped in his safe little boring bubble where nothing interesting ever happened. About 3 months ago, everything changed between Colt and me. We were having coffee, and he reached across the table and took my hand, just for a second, but it sent electricity through my entire body. I hadn't felt that kind of spark or excitement with Wyatt in over a year. Colt looked me straight in the eyes and said he couldn't stop thinking about me, that he'd never stop loving me, even after all these years apart. I should have pulled my hand away, should have reminded him that I was engaged and planning a wedding. But instead, I just sat there feeling more alive and desired than I had in months. That's when I realized how dead inside my relationship with Wyatt had made me feel. Look, I'm not proud of what happened next, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't enjoy every single second of it. Colt and I started meeting more frequently, sometimes twice a week. I told Wyatt I had more work events and girls' nights, and honestly, he didn't even seem to care enough to ask for details or want to come along sometimes. He'd just nod and go back to whatever stupid game he was playing on his phone, which basically tells you everything you need to know about how checked out he was from our relationship. Meanwhile, Colt would text me good morning every single day and ask how I slept. He'd send me funny memes during work that actually made me laugh, and he remembered little things I mentioned in passing conversations. When I said I was craving these specific cookies from a bakery across town, he showed up at my office the next day with a whole box of them. When was the last time Wyatt did something thoughtful and romantic like that? I honestly can't even remember because he'd completely stopped putting in any effort once he knew I wasn't going anywhere. The physical stuff started gradually and naturally. Colt would hug me a little longer when we said goodbye, or put his hand on my back when we were walking somewhere together. It felt so right and natural, like we were just picking up where we left off in college, when we were actually happy and passionate about each other. 3 months ago, we were sitting in his car after coffee because it was raining, and we were just talking and laughing about old times, and then suddenly we were kissing. And oh my God, it was like coming back to life after being dead for 3 years. I'd completely forgotten what it felt like to be wanted and desired like that, to have someone look at me like I was the most beautiful and fascinating woman in the world. With Wyatt, intimacy had become this scheduled, predictable, boring routine that felt more like a chore than anything passionate or exciting. But with Colt, everything felt spontaneous and electric and alive. I know technically it was cheating, but it didn't feel like cheating because there was no real relationship left to cheat on. It felt like I was finally being true to myself and my needs for the first time in years, instead of just going through the motions of this fake engagement. We started meeting at his apartment instead of public places where people might see us and ask questions. I'd tell Wyatt I was working late or meeting girlfriends for dinner, and I'd spend hours with Colt just talking and reconnecting and remembering what it felt like to be myself again. Yes, we were physical, but it was about so much more than that. Colt made me feel like the confident, interesting, desirable woman I used to be before I got trapped in this suffocating relationship where I felt invisible and unappreciated. For the first time in months, I was actually excited about something. I'd wake up looking forward to Colt's good morning texts, planning what I'd wear when I saw him, thinking about our conversations throughout the day. Meanwhile, Wyatt and I were basically just roommates who occasionally talked about wedding logistics and bill payments. The worst part was everyone constantly telling me how lucky I was and how perfect Wyatt was for me. My parents never stopped going on about what a good choice I'd made, how stable and reliable he was, how our kids would be so fortunate to have him as a father. But they didn't see what I saw every single day. How he'd shut down whenever I tried to have a real conversation about anything important. How he never showed genuine interest in my thoughts or feelings or dreams. How he just expected me to be satisfied with the absolute bare minimum effort. Colt actually wanted to know what I thought about things. He valued my opinions and made me feel smart and interesting and worth listening to. With Wyatt, I felt like just another item on his boring to-do list that he could check off and ignore. The texting with Colt became constant throughout the day. We'd message each other from the moment we woke up until we went to sleep. He'd send me photos of random things that reminded him of me, and I'd share details about my day that I never bothered telling Wyatt because Wyatt never cared enough to ask follow-up questions or remember what I told him. Colt knew more about my daily life and what was actually going on with me than my own fiancé did. And that's because he actually cared enough to pay attention and be present when I was talking. I wasn't planning to leave Wyatt or blow up my entire life or anything that dramatic and complicated. I just needed something that made me feel alive and appreciated while I figured out how to either fix my relationship or get through this wedding that was already planned and paid for. 2 months ago, things started getting more complicated when Colt began talking about us having a real future together. He said he'd never stopped regretting letting me go in college, and that watching me get engaged to someone else was pure torture for him. He started asking if I was really truly happy with Wyatt, if I could honestly see myself spending the rest of my life in such a boring, passionless relationship where I felt unheard and unappreciated. And honestly, when he put it like that, I started questioning everything I thought I wanted. Was I really going to marry someone just because he was safe and stable and my parents approved? What about passion and excitement and feeling truly understood and desired by your partner? What about feeling alive instead of just going through the motions? Colt made me realize that I'd been settling for way less than I deserved my entire adult life. But I also wasn't ready to completely blow up everything I'd built. The wedding was already planned, deposits were paid, invitations had been sent out months ago. Breaking up with Wyatt would mean disappointing my parents, dealing with all the family drama and embarrassing questions, having to start completely over at 28. It felt overwhelming and terrifying, and honestly kind of impossible to even imagine. So I kept both relationships going, thinking I could figure it out after the wedding somehow. Maybe Wyatt and I would grow closer once we were actually married and settled, or maybe I'd find a way to end things with Colt without destroying everything I'd worked to build with Wyatt and our families. Then Wyatt started getting suspicious and weird about everything. He began asking way too many questions about where I was going and who I was spending time with. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how I seemed distracted lately, or how I was always on my phone texting someone. I told him he was being paranoid and controlling, that I needed space to breathe and have my own friendships and social life, which was completely true. He was being possessive and jealous for no good reason that he could prove. Well, okay, maybe there was a reason, but he didn't actually know that, so his behavior was still unreasonable and suffocating. His constant suspicion and questioning made me feel defensive and annoyed, and we started fighting way more often than we ever had before. He'd accuse me of being secretive and distant, and I'd turn it around on him for not trusting me and being insecure about my friendships. These fights actually made me feel more justified about spending time with Colt, because they proved how incompatible Wyatt and I really were as people. Colt never questioned my independence or made me feel guilty for having other relationships and interests outside of him. The worst fight happened 3 weeks before our wedding. Wyatt found a receipt in my car from this restaurant downtown and started interrogating me about when I'd been there, because I'd told him I was working late that night and grabbed something quick near the office. I said I'd met a coworker for dinner after staying late to finish a project, but he kept pushing for more details like some kind of detective. He wanted to know which coworker, why I hadn't mentioned it before, why I hadn't invited him to come along, why I'd never talked about being friends with this person. His interrogation made me absolutely furious because I'm not his property, and I shouldn't have to account for every single minute of my day like I'm some kind of prisoner. That's when I really lost it and told him he was being controlling and insecure, that this possessive behavior was exactly why our relationship felt so suffocating and why I couldn't talk to him about anything. 3 days before our rehearsal dinner, I made what turned out to be a huge mistake. I'd been texting Colt while Wyatt was in the shower getting ready for work. And when he came out, I quickly put my phone face down on the nightstand without thinking to close the message thread completely. The next morning, when I went downstairs to make us coffee, Wyatt's phone was dead, so he grabbed mine to check the weather like he'd done a million times before. That's when he saw everything. Months and months of conversations between Colt and me. I came back upstairs with our coffee and found him sitting on our bed, holding my phone, looking like someone had just told him his entire family had died in a car accident. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen, scrolling through message after message after message. I tried to grab the phone away from him, but he pulled it back and kept reading with this horrible expression on his face. The silence in that room felt like it was going to kill me. When he finally looked up at me, his expression was completely blank and empty. He said my name like it was a question, like he wasn't sure who I was anymore, or if he'd ever really known me at all. Then, he started reading some of the messages out loud in this weird, flat voice. The ones where Colt told me he loved me and missed me, where I said I thought about him constantly, where we made plans to meet up at his apartment. Hearing those private, intimate conversations spoken in Wyatt's voice felt completely violating and wrong. Like he was deliberately trying to hurt me by making something beautiful sound dirty and shameful. I tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that Colt and I were just old friends catching up and reconnecting, that some of the messages were being taken completely out of context. But Wyatt kept scrolling and finding more evidence that made my explanations sound ridiculous and hollow. Messages about meeting at Colt's place, conversations about how bored and unhappy I was in my relationship, detailed plans we'd made to see each other while Wyatt was at work. I could see him putting all the pieces together in real time, and I knew there was no way to spin this that would make it look innocent or harmless. So I decided to go on the offensive instead of just standing there letting him attack me. I told Wyatt that this was exactly why I hadn't felt comfortable talking to him about my friendships, because he was controlling and possessive and couldn't handle me having relationships with other people, especially men. I said that if he'd been paying more attention to our relationship instead of taking me completely for granted, maybe I wouldn't have needed to find emotional support and understanding elsewhere. I reminded him of all the times he'd dismissed my feelings or ignored me when I tried to talk to him about problems in our relationship that were making me unhappy. His reaction was definitely not what I expected at all. Instead of yelling or getting defensive or angry like I thought he would, he just looked sad and tired and defeated. He asked how long it had been going on, and when I hesitated because I didn't want to make things worse, he said he could just scroll through all the messages himself if I preferred to let him figure it out on his own. So I told him about 6 months, but I made sure to emphasize that it was mostly just talking and emotional connection, that nothing really serious or relationship ending had happened between us. Which was technically true in my mind. Colt and I hadn't slept together or done anything that I considered completely crossing the line into unforgivable territory. But then Wyatt asked if I'd been physical with Colt at all, and I couldn't exactly lie when he was literally holding months of evidence in his hands. I tried to minimize it as much as possible, said it was just a few kisses here and there, that it didn't mean anything serious or threaten our relationship. But then he found the messages where Colt and I talked about our chemistry and how much we'd missed touching each other and being close. That's when Wyatt finally completely lost his mind. He threw my phone across the room and it shattered against the wall into like a million pieces. He said he couldn't believe he'd been planning to spend his entire life with someone who could lie to his face for months while carrying on with another man behind his back. He said he felt like a complete idiot for trusting me, for believing I was the person he thought he was marrying. That's when I really let him have it, and told him exactly what I thought about his role in all this mess. I told him that maybe if he'd been a better fiancé who actually paid attention to me and made me feel loved and appreciated, I wouldn't have been so vulnerable to someone else's attention in the first place. I said that this whole situation was as much his fault as mine, because he'd gotten lazy and complacent in our relationship, taking me for granted and assuming I'd just be satisfied with his minimal effort forever. After our massive blowout fight, Wyatt barely spoke to me for the next 2 days leading up to our rehearsal dinner. He moved his stuff to the couch and started leaving for work super early to avoid having to see me or talk to me. I kept trying to have conversations with him, to explain my side of things and help him understand why this had happened, but he'd just walk away whenever I started talking like I was some kind of toxic person he couldn't stand to be around. It was like living with a complete stranger who hated me. And honestly, it felt really unfair, because I was trying to work things out, while he was just shutting down and giving me the silent treatment like a child. I figured he just needed some time to process everything and calm down, and that we'd eventually work through this whole mess before the wedding. I mean, we'd already sent out all the invitations. Both our families were flying in from different states, everything was completely paid for and planned. Surely he wouldn't throw away 3 years together and our entire future over some text messages and a few innocent meetings with an ex-boyfriend. The rehearsal dinner was at this really upscale restaurant that my parents had booked and paid for months in advance. Both our families were going to be there, plus the entire wedding party and all our closest friends. Basically everyone important in both our lives. I spent extra time getting ready that night, hoping to remind Wyatt why he'd fallen in love with me in the first place, and maybe start healing some of the damage from our fight. I wore the blue dress that he'd always said was his absolute favorite on me, and I did my hair and makeup exactly the way he'd always complimented before. When we got to the restaurant, he was being polite but distant, just going through the motions of being a good fiancé, but not really present or engaged with me or anyone else. I kept trying to catch his eye across the table, to smile at him and act like everything was normal and fine between us, but he barely looked in my direction all evening. My dad gave this beautiful, heartfelt toast about welcoming Wyatt into our family and how proud he was of the man I'd chosen to marry. Everyone was clapping and smiling and taking pictures, and for just a moment I thought maybe we could actually get past this rough patch and move forward with our lives together. Then Wyatt stood up from his chair. At first, I thought he was going to give a speech, thanking everyone for coming and being part of our special day, maybe even apologize for being weird and distant the past few days. Instead, he thanked everyone for being there and said he had prepared a special presentation that he wanted to share with the group. Before I could even process what was happening or try to stop him, he'd somehow connected his laptop to the restaurant's projection system that they used for business presentations. Suddenly, screenshots of my most private text conversations with Colt were displayed on the wall for everyone in that room to see. My most personal thoughts and feelings, blown up huge for our entire wedding party to read like some kind of horrible movie. Messages where I complained about being bored and unfulfilled in my relationship, where Colt told me he loved me and couldn't live without me, where we made plans to meet up and spend time together. Every single person in that room could see everything. My parents, his parents, our siblings, the wedding party, family, friends, everyone. The silence that followed was absolutely devastating and horrible. I watched my parents' faces change from confusion to shock to complete humiliation in real time. Wyatt's family looked disgusted and appalled, like they'd just discovered I was some kind of criminal or terrible person. My bridesmaids were staring at me like they'd never seen me before in their lives. Like I was a complete stranger who'd been lying to them about who I really was. Then Wyatt calmly announced to the entire room that our wedding was officially canceled, thanked everyone for coming out to support us, and walked out of the restaurant without another word, leaving me sitting there with my entire life completely destroyed and in shambles. The aftermath was an absolute nightmare that I'm still dealing with 3 weeks later. My mother immediately started crying and hyperventilating and had to be helped to a chair by my aunts. My father looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear forever from embarrassment. People were actually taking photos of the projection screen with their phones before the restaurant staff finally figured out how to turn the whole system off. Everyone was whispering and staring at me like I was some kind of monster or homewrecker, even though this was my own relationship and my own business that had nothing to do with any of them. I tried desperately to explain to my parents that the messages were being taken completely out of context, that Wyatt was being vindictive and cruel by exposing private conversations like that in front of everyone we knew. But they were too shocked and embarrassed and angry to listen to anything I had to say in my own defense. 3 weeks later, my entire life is completely different and ruined. Wyatt moved all his stuff out of our apartment and won't return any of my calls or text messages, even when I'm just trying to get back some of my things that he took. My parents are barely speaking to me because they're humiliated by what happened in front of all their friends and family. And they're furious about all the money they spent on a wedding that never happened. About half my friends have completely taken his side, saying what I did was terrible and unforgivable, and that he had every right to expose me publicly like that. The other half think he went way too far with the public humiliation, but they still think I'm wrong for texting another guy while I was engaged. Nobody seems to understand that I was just trying to find some happiness and excitement in a relationship that had become boring and dead, that I was just looking for someone who actually appreciated me and made me feel alive again. Wyatt is already dating someone new, some plain basic girl from his office who probably has zero personality and will never challenge him to grow or be a better person. Meanwhile, Colt decided he doesn't want to deal with all the drama and complications and has completely ghosted me. Won't respond to any of my messages. So now I'm 28, single, unemployed because I can't stand the looks and whispers at my job, and everyone thinks I'm the villain in this whole story. But honestly, I'm not sorry for trying to find someone who appreciated me and made me feel special. I'm just sorry it all exploded in my face the way it did. The worst part is how quickly everyone turned on me. My own sister won't even take my calls anymore because she says I embarrassed the whole family. My best friend since high school told me she can't be associated with someone who would cheat on their fiancé and lie about it for months. Like, Where was all this moral superiority when they were complaining about their own relationships and boyfriends? Suddenly, everyone's acting like they're perfect and have never made a mistake in their lives. What really gets me is how everyone's treating Wyatt like some kind of saint now. People keep posting on social media about what a great guy he is and how he deserves so much better. They're acting like he was this perfect boyfriend when I lived with him for 3 years, and know exactly how boring and emotionally unavailable he really was. But now that I'm the bad guy, everyone's rewriting history to make him look like the victim. I had to move back in with my parents temporarily because I couldn't afford our apartment by myself. And let me tell you, that's been a nightmare. My mom gives me these disappointed looks every time she sees me. And my dad barely acknowledges I exist. They keep making comments about how I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me, how I ruined my reputation and their standing in the community. They're more concerned about what their friends think than about how I'm doing or whether I'm okay. Every family gathering is awkward now because everyone knows what happened, and they all have opinions about my life choices. The absolute worst part happened 2 weeks ago when I ran into Wyatt at the grocery store. He was with his new girlfriend, this mousy little brunette who works in accounting or something equally boring. She was hanging all over him, and he looked genuinely happy in a way I honestly never saw when we were together. They were laughing and holding hands and acting all cute, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. When he saw me, he didn't even acknowledge me, just steered her away to a different aisle like I was some kind of dangerous person he needed to avoid. That hurt more than I want to admit, because we were together for 3 years, and now I'm nothing to him. I tried reaching out to Colt one more time last week, thinking maybe now that everything's out in the open, we could finally be together without all the secrecy and complications. But he read my message and didn't even respond. Apparently, when things got messy and real, he decided I wasn't worth the trouble after all. So the man who claimed he never stopped loving me and wanted a future together just disappeared. The second things got difficult. That really shows you what kind of person he is. All talk when it's fun and exciting, but nowhere to be found when you actually need support. I've been applying for jobs in other cities because I can't stand living here anymore, where everyone knows my business and judges me for it. Phoenix, Dallas, maybe Chicago? Somewhere I can start over where people don't know about the rehearsal dinner disaster. But even that's been harder than expected, because somehow word has gotten around, and a couple of potential employers have already heard about what happened. One interviewer actually asked me about handling confidential information and maintaining professional relationships, and I could tell they knew. This whole thing is following me everywhere I try to go. The thing that makes me angriest is that nobody seems to care about my side of the story or why I did what I did. Everyone just wants to paint me as this terrible person who destroyed a good relationship for no reason. But they didn't live in that relationship day after day, feeling invisible and unappreciated and bored out of their minds. They didn't have to deal with someone who took them completely for granted and never put in any real effort to make them happy. Yes, I made some choices that hurt people, but I was trying to survive in a relationship that was slowly killing my spirit. I know I'm supposed to feel guilty and apologetic, but honestly, I mainly just feel angry. Angry at Wyatt for humiliating me in front of everyone instead of handling it privately like an adult. Angry at Colt for abandoning me when I needed him most after promising he'd always be there. Angry at my family and friends for judging me so harshly when they don't understand what I was going through. Angry at everyone for acting like I'm some kind of monster when all I did was try to find someone who made me feel alive and wanted again. Maybe I'll never get married now. Maybe I'll never find someone who accepts my past and wants to build a future with me. Maybe I'll have to live with being known as the girl who cheated on her fiancé and ruined her own wedding for the rest of my life. But at least I know I was honest about what I needed, even if nobody else wants to see it that way. At least I didn't settle for a lifetime of boredom and disappointment just to make other people happy. And honestly, if that makes me the villain in everyone else's story, then so be it. I'd rather be alone and true to myself than trapped in a relationship that makes me feel dead inside, even if everyone else thinks that relationship looked perfect from the outside.